So in the case of just 2 receptors, you can see a difference in KD values of a factor of 10 offers very minimal specificity, while a difference of 100 or more offers very good specificity. As expected, higher fractional occupancy of the target receptor or a lower occupancy of the off-target receptor will also produce high specificity. For this particular case, where the difference, in this particular case we have case of D is equal to 10 nanomolar. I'm not sure I drew this perfectly. And you have 10 off-target receptors, and you let them all have case of D of 10 micromolar, so a sort of 1,000-fold difference. Then you could plot specificity, fractional occupancy, and then you could also see that there's roughly this 1,000-fold difference in this curve for the secondary receptor. Okay, so take a minute and talk to someone next to you about this one. Okay, a protein binds to DNA sequence AAAA with 10 nanomolar affinity. The same protein binds to the RNA sequence AUAAUA with 15 nanomolar affinity and binds to a lipid with 10 millimolar affinity. Which of the following statements is true?
I don't think so. I think they can. Specificity is relative. It's kind of confusing that we like see two sides of this. I'm pretty sure it's because like it's going to be fairly low. I'm pretty sure it's exactly. I mean, yeah. What if you say 2 orders of magnitude? Right.
Also, 2 orders of magnitude goes for like completely for all practical purposes not bound. So it's actually just 1 order when you're it's 1 order magnitude. Yeah, it's not wrong. It just doesn't 2 orders.
But what you're talking about like for specificity.
Okay, so who thinks A is the correct answer? This is the true statement. B, C, D. Okay, I got a few hands for C, I think none for A and D, and then mostly B, and then some people who didn't answer. B is the correct answer. Who wants to explain their reasoning if you picked B? And like 20 people raised their hand, so someone has to answer. Yes.
It's high affinity, but the values are very close together, so that's low specificity. And then you can just process elimination for all the other answer choices.
Great. So what Rebecca said was that we have nanomolar affinity for both our RNA and our DNA sequence. And what I previously sort of mentioned was that if you're thinking sort of on a relative scale of what constitutes high affinity, it's things in the nanomolar range. Okay? But it's clearly not specific between these two because they have very similar case of Ds. Okay? That is what this is indicating to you. If you have 10 nanomolar affinity, it's saying that your dissociation constant in case of D is approximately 10 nanomolar or in that range. But for a lipid, it's 10 millimolar affinity, and so we said things that were of sort of low affinity or low strength are in this millimolar or even micromolar range. Okay? So the protein having high specificity for lipids over RNA and DNA makes no sense. We have nothing to indicate that. The protein binds with low affinity to RNA and DNA, but high specificity, so it's sort of the reverse of B. These are high affinity because they have this small nanomolar range, but it can't distinguish between the two. They're in sort of the same range. And then the protein binds with low affinity and low specificity to all three targets. Again, I mean, you could maybe argue this one to me that none of them are necessarily going to be specific, but I had sort of told you if we're in the nanomolar range, we're going to call this high affinity. And it was really things in sort of the 10 micromolar or the milli range that are low. So high affinity is often achieved through hydrophobic contacts. However, if you want specificity, you need to trade off some of the hydrophobic parts for polar or charged residues. So what brings the specificity is sort of a particular pattern of binding, okay? Particular pattern of negative charged residues, positively charged residues, things that are going to be able to salt bridge, things that are going to be able to make hydrogen bonds. What makes bonds really strong is really high affinity is just putting in a bunch of hydrophobic groups, but these two things are in competition. You cannot just change your binding site, like say in your drug, you can't just put a whole bunch of hydrophobic residues on it because it's not going to be able to find its target. It doesn't have anything specific telling it where to go. It'll bind to anything that has hydrophobic residues. And so these sort of, like I said, these two things are in a trade-off. You sort of want a mixture of both your polar charged residues to sort of give you the pattern that you need, but then you need a lot of hydrophobic parts to have sufficiently high affinity of binding.